So just quickly, let's go over the agenda this evening for our board training. We will first be going through some general items, so officer positions, governing documents, board meeting basics, tips for board meetings. Then we'll move on to financials, reserve studies, and do a quick Vanica board portal overview. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we will go to the questions and answers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, who's going to go through the board officer positions and board meeting basics.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Bragg. Like she said, I was Associate Director with CAMCO. I hope you're all having a great evening. So your governing documents are going to detail the three main officer positions within the board. Could be up to 4, depending on how your governing documents are written. You have the president, which they serve as a liaison between the board and the management company. They preside over meetings, they preside over the annual meetings and the board meetings. And they also have, but they do not have the ability to veto votes. They don't have extra powers or anything like that, such as those. It's all still based on a democratic count of votes between all the board members, a majority vote. The vice president will step in to fulfill the roles and duties of the president when the president is unavailable. But usually governing documents do not call for a vice president in most cases. And then you have the treasurer. The treasurer is responsible for reviewing the association's financials on a monthly basis. They assist and work as a liaison with the association staff accountants and the CPA, and they oversee the budget process and approvals with the board by working hand in hand with the community manager and the accounting staff. And then you have the board secretary, one of the most important people in the board officer position, because they ensure that the meeting minutes are taken and recorded for the community. They're entrusted with maintaining association records, and they also oversee giving notice to the board and the association about documents, what's on the portal, what is the minutes, and also when it comes time to elections, they also make sure that proper information is given out when board meetings are and so forth. Next page, please. Governing documents and their purpose. We're going to be going over several of the governing documents but usually it's the main 3 ones that provide the details and information for your community. Your governing documents define the rights and obligations of both the community and the owners. They create a binding relationship between the owner and the community association. When you purchase your home, you sign a document saying that you would abide by the governing documents, rules and regulations, CCRs, and also buy into the association itself. They also establish a mechanism for governing and funding the community association operations. And then you also have the set forth rules and standards which protect owners and the community. They enhance property values and promote harmonious living. The first of the key governing documents is your declaration, also known as your covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or master deed. In Pennsylvania, most likely it's known as the declaration. These declarations define the portions of the community owned by the individual owner and those owned by the community association. Those are going to be considered your common elements, your limited common elements, and then your owner responsibilities. This helps define who's responsible for what parts of the community. It also establishes the binding relationship between all the owners and the community association. They establish the standards and restrictions which promote harmonious living, such as your rules and regulations. And they establish the framework for the community association and its management. provide an outline for the financial support of the community association through assessments. And they also define when assessments are due, how late fees are processed, and so forth, which could be either further defined with rules and regulations or other governing documents. And they also establish a plan for the transition of control from the developer to the owner, especially with newer associations. You'll see that the developer will be in charge in the beginning, and then slowly, after a certain percentage of homes are sold, it'll be transferred over to the homeowners. Next, please. The bylaws. The bylaws are your outline for your administrative and management of the community. This helps define what is required to be a member of the community and the requirements for membership. It also defines the requirements for member meetings and the annual meeting and board meetings. It defines the voting rights of members. It also provides a procedure for electing the board of directors, the terms of the board of directors, and as well as the duties of the board of directors, including officer positions that we talked about before. They define what positions are required for your association. Rules and regulations. Normally, the rules and regulations are done after the association develops their declaration and their bylaws. Declarations and bylaws are signed by a judge at the court and filed with the courthouse as part of your master deed, where the rules and regulations reiterate standards and restrictions listed in other governing documents. They will outline policies and procedures in more detail. They'll establish policies for items such as ARC requests and ARC requirements, maintenance standards. They'll also establish noise policies, such as if you define that you can't have loud noises after 9 p.m. You could also establish the policy for leasing requirements, such as minimum of 1 year, so forth. And then also trash and recycling are some of the common rules and regulations that are established. And lastly, they define the process of levying fines should an owner be in violation of the rules and regulations or CCRs. So the responsibility, and now we're going to get into the responsibility and powers of the board of directors. The biggest key thing about being on a board of directors is making sure that you have meeting your fiduciary responsibility. What is that? It's the way you act for the best interest of the association. It's not for, you hear a lot where a person gets on the board because they want to take care of agenda items that they want to take care of. That's not meeting your fiduciary responsibility. You have a duty of care, making informed decisions. And then you have a duty of loyalty, which is key because you're acting fairly and in good faith for the benefit of the entire association, not just a group of people. The enforcement of governing documents and rules and regulations. These should all be done uniformly and consistently. What is good for one is good for all and must be enforced equally across the board. The board does have the power to modify and change rules and regulations with due process. What does due process mean? That they review the rules and regulations per the declaration and bylaws and make amendments in accordance with those governing documents. That could be from a 60, depending on your governing documents, it could be a 50%, 67%, or more based on what is written in your declaration on amendments to those rules. And they are subject to association approval per the governing documents. All right, structure of board meetings. This is, so most board meetings are open meetings, which means that the association or membership is welcome to come view the meeting. Versus closed meeting is when you have a meeting between the board and management company. And then executive sessions will be meetings where the board of directors are discussing sensitive items such as delinquencies, violations, and so forth. What are some of the things that we will be addressing when you're having an agenda in the meeting? What kind of format are you going to be maintaining? This is some of the ways each association is going to have a different setup for the meeting format, and based on the management report that is given to you by your manager. These are usually defined and work together between the board themselves and the manager. But most commonly, they're going to have action items, information items, old business, new business, and then executive session. Tips for a successful board meeting should be about 45 minutes to 2 hours in length. If you start getting past the 2 hour length, most people start shutting down, not paying attention, and things do not get accomplished. If you have that kind of issue in your community, it is highly recommended that you do timed agendas. So when you're basing out the agenda, if you're talking about repaving the paving or mill and pave the street, you're going to set a specific time for that agenda item, such as 30 minutes of discussion, and you'll keep that 30 minutes of discussion. Reviewing materials prior to the meeting, that is very important because you want to come in there prepared. Yeah, you're going to have questions for the manager, question that you want to bring up in front of the board. So you could go over those items so that way the meeting is timely and keeps on moving forward. And then following the agenda order, that is another part of the steps. Meeting minutes, where I said the secretary is one of the most important parts of the board. The meeting minutes are the legal record for the association and provide a historic log for the future. That means all meeting minutes need to be approved, allows the homeowner, and then posted for the homeowners to view, which we post on our portal pages. Allows homeowners to stay informed of what board action items are taken, so they feel part of the community and invested in the community. The secretary and other appointed board members should be responsible for taking the meeting minutes. Manager, it is not recommended for managers to record the minutes, as they need to be engaged in meetings to be able to look up items for the board members or provide information and ensure that you guys are meeting your fiduciary responsibility, and also ensuring that the meeting is running smoothly. Some of the things that are required to be included in the meeting minutes is the name of the association, the call to order and adjournment times, who is present and absent, actions and motions. With the meeting minutes, you're not going to have frivolous information such as the whole discussion. You're not going to have a parroted paragraph of the discussion that happened, or board member A fought with board member B. This is going to be where board member A made a motion and it was seconded by board member B to spend $1,000 to repair potholes within the community. The board voted 3-2 to approve the motion. There should be separate meeting minutes recorded for the executive session, because you will be having sensitive information within that meeting. You would have separate meeting minutes that the association would not be privileged to, the membership would not be privileged to. And meeting minutes should be a summary, not a transcript, like I said before, and should follow the meeting agenda. As a reminder for the boards should utilize the formal process for approvals. Many boards use Robert Rules of Order for conducting meeting minutes, and then also give ample opportunity for all board members to provide opinions and input. Confidentiality during the executive session is a must. I highly stress it, as lawsuits and other, issues have arisen from people talking outside the board meeting and outside the confidentiality of the executive session. Some of the things that are kept in the executive session and confidentiality are such as lawsuits, collections, and violations. You also want to create a board-only email to address email address for record keeping. So that way homeowners could address the board, send information, and so forth. And at all meetings, you should be engaged. Attend all meetings as possible, participate in discussions and decisions. We highly recommend you check your email regularly, as this day and age, a lot more information could be done between the meetings to help shorten the meetings, but also help continue the success of the association, ensuring that things are getting done in a prompt, timely manner. And those could be recorded during the meeting as well through affirmations, as you saw earlier. And then also, again, review all pertinent materials that are provided by your manager for those meetings. That said, I'll turn it back over to Lauren, that will be handling association financials and capital reserves. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. All right, so first we're going to go over the association financials. We'll be discussing sort of the three main reports that are first within the financial package that the board receives each month. There are additional documents that are in your financial package, which are important as well, but we do like to focus on the first three. So we'll go through those, and then we will discuss the capital reserve studies, why they're important, and why association should have them. Well, seems it does not want to move to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I am going to use my little spotlight for this. I'm hoping it's showing up. So the first report that we're going to review is your narrative. So the narrative really provides an overview of all of the different reports that are within your association's financial package. So the narrative really gives you kind of like a snapshot of everything that's happening within your association. So we'll just start at the top and work our way down. So the first section of the narrative is the operating results. Here you'll just see your basic income and expenses, so all lumped together. Later on, you'll see a report that breaks down your exact income and expenses a little bit more. But then this shows you, and there's also, two different columns. So you have over here, you're going to have your year to date, or excuse me, your month. So this is month to month. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll have your year to date. So this just gives you your income and expenses for December. And then this variance column shows you the variance based on your monthly budget. So in this case, the association actually had a $12,000 surplus for December, which is great. That means they were operating better than they had budgeted. And then you can also go over here to see year-to-date actuals. Because this is a year-end statement, you can see this is as of December 31st. You are seeing that the association's ending the year with almost a $1,200 surplus, which means that they have done better than they budgeted. Typically, your budget is a zero-based budget, meaning that all of your income and expenses are to equal out at the end of the year. The next section is your cash position. This really gives a summary of the various bank accounts that are held by the association. So you can see here that there's a NCB lockbox checking. This is typically your operating account where all of your operating expenses are paid from. So the monthly bills are paid out of this account and the monthly assessments are deposited into this account. You then have a bunch of other bank accounts down here. You can see a money market, a asset account, which is a Janney sweep account, and then you see savings and CDs. These accounts are typically your reserve accounts, where these are funds that are put to the side for future capital expenditures, which we'll kind of review a little bit more under the capital reserve study. The next section is your accounts receivable. So this is a summary of all of the funds that are owed to the association. So it's a summary of the delinquencies that are happening within the community. And it gives you a snapshot from last month compared to this month. So at this time, at the end of December, it was 6,200. The month before you were at 96. So actually seeing this net change of a negative number here is good. That means you've actually collected an additional $3,500 towards your delinquencies. The next section are unpaid invoices. And this is broken down into bills that have been received and not paid. There can be a few different reasons for that, just of the timing of bills, or the bills are expenses for another month. So say, for example, you might receive your January invoice in December and you choose not to pay it until January. So that could be an explanation for that. And then what are called your accrued expenses. These are expenses that take place during the month. So these particular expenses take place in December, but we aren't invoiced for them till a later date. So once you go down to this next category, which is accrued expenses, you can see we have a breakdown. So it's $359. You can see this also is $359. And you can see the breakdown is gas, water, electric, and telephone. A lot of times your utilities are accrued expenses because you do not get the bills until the next month, which is why we do the accruals on your income statements. The next is your operating reserve status. The first line that makes this up is your prior year operating reserves. This is a little misnamed because it should really be prior years. So this is all of the collective years put together. So between all of the years the association has operated, they have a bit of an operating deficit of $8,000. Because your current year, you actually have a surplus of roughly $1,200, you're actually reducing your operating reserve deficit, which is good. You do want that number to be almost at zero. And what that sort of means is that in previous years, the association may have had to borrow from your capital reserve account to pay for operating expenses. The next is the capital reserve status. So this is broken down to a few different categories. It shows you what your prior year replacement reserve fund balance was, your current year funding, so the money that you put towards the reserve account for the year, your current year expenses, which are actually summarized in the next section. So these are capital expenses that the association has incurred in 2021. And then it also includes working capital or capital contributions. And then also any interest income that you might be getting from your various accounts up here. So the interest from your CDs or your money markets or your savings accounts. And then lastly, you can see the capital expenditures. So down here, these are capital projects that happened within 2021, and they make up your current year replacement reserve expenses reflected here. All right, next is our balance sheet. So the balance sheet reiterates a lot of the information that you saw on the narrative, but it breaks it down into assets, liabilities, and equities. So your assets are cash. So again, this is a summary of the different bank accounts you have. It also, under your assets, includes your prepaid expenses. So for example, on here, there's a section for prepaid insurance. Typically, you get lump sum bills for insurance, so it annotates what we're considering prepaid insurance or any other prepaid contracts for the year. And then it also takes into account accounts receivable, because these are funds that are essentially owed to the association and are an asset to you once collected. Down here, you can see your liabilities. The first one is your prepaid assessments. These might be payments made by homeowners in advance. So sometimes homeowners pay for their association fees a year in advance, a few months in advance. And really what this is, they're considered liabilities because if for some reason, say for example, that homeowner sells, the association would have to refund whatever portion of the assessment that they have, their monthly assessment that they have prepaid. You also have liabilities of your accounts payable. So these are invoices that you still need to pay, and then your accrued expenses. And then finally, in your equity categories, you have, again, this is sort of similar to your narrative page. You have your prior year replacement reserves, your current year, and then any net income, which this number here matches the income that you have year to date in December. I apologize, for some reason my computer is not acting as quickly as my fingers. All right, so next is your statement of revenue and expenses. That is what the report is called when generated through Vanica, which is our property management software. But essentially that's a fancy term also for an income statement. So basically this outlines all of the incomes and all the income and expenses incurred by the association. And it is broken down into income at the top and expenses at the bottom. Your income is typically made up of your monthly condominium fees or homeowners association fees, and then any maybe miscellaneous categories. On your statement of revenue and expenses, it's kind of broken down into 3 different sections. So you have what they're referring to as the current period or the current month. So this shows you the actual for the month, the actual for the budget that's allocated to that month, and then the variance. This variance column is really important to keep in mind, especially during budgeting season, which we'll talk about that a little bit more. You then have your year-to-date column. Because this is a December expense, you can see that you have your actual up here. So this is all of your income for the year, what your budget is, and then your variance. And then finally, in this last column, you can see what the category was budgeted for the entire year. This gives you a better idea when you don't have a year-end statement like this is. It gives you a better idea of how you're trending towards budget. So as I mentioned, these variances can be used as a really good budgeting tool. We're about to be entering budgeting season. It's very hard to believe. And we use the first 6 months of your financials in order to help forecast your expenses for the rest of the year. So for example, if you come down here and look at maintenance expenses, again, you can see that this association spent $2,900 in maintenance and repairs expenses, but they only budgeted $8,000. Oh, I lost my spotlight, I apologize. So you can then see that they have a deficit of $21,000 for maintenance and repairs expense. When we're going through our budgeting process, you're going to want to take a look at any large variances, make sure that there are explanations as to why they're occurring, and then take that into consideration when developing your next year budget. So right now we're developing our 2023 budgets. So we're going to take a hard look at any of the categories that might be over for the year. So those are all of the different financial reports. As I said, that these are just the three that are included. These are just three of all of the reports that are included. You also would get an AR report, a general ledger, which shows all of the expenses and even more details, bank reconciliations. But really, these first three are the reports that the board focuses most on, in my experience. All right, so now we will move on to reserve studies. So I think the best way to start this is, what is a reserve study? So a reserve study is an in-depth evaluation of a property's physical components and the analysis of the cost and time frame anticipated for the anticipated replacements or major repairs of common area elements, that was a big mouthful. Essentially, a reserve study is an assessment of all of the components. So when we say components, we're talking about, if you're a condominium association, we're talking about your elevators or your common area HVAC or your roofing system, your sidewalk, your facade. And it's really assigning what they call a useful life, how much longer you will need, how much longer each of those elements will last before it may need to be replaced. A reserve study also includes a physical and financial component. So the physical component, we'll get into that a little bit more, and then the financial is the dollar value assigned to those replacements. And that's really why this ties into your financials and why we've grouped these together, because when you're doing your operating budget every year, you need to be thinking about future capital projects and how much you should be contributing to your capital reserve account each year. So first is the physical analysis. This is typically done by an engineering firm. So an association would engage an engineering firm to come and do the reserve study. The reserve study outlines all the major components and when they will come up for replacement over the next 30 years. So for example, if you just recently replaced a boiler, I think a boiler has about a 50-year lifespan, that might not appear on your reserve study because it's not slated to be replaced for the next 30-year time frame. We do recommend that reserve studies are updated every 3 to 5 years to keep them current. And it also, especially when you're doing a lot of capital reserve projects and doing a lot of these replacement projects, it'll actually change sort of the financial component of it that we'll get into in a little bit later. So the physical analysis consists of inventory of all major common area components and an assessment of each component's current condition and remaining life. Typically what happens is that the engineering firm that you're have engaged for the reserve study will come out and do a physical walkthrough and evaluation of the property. This typically, depending on which level of reserve study you do, this typically takes half a day to a day, and they'll come and look at everything. They're not doing an in-depth analysis. They're not running things. It really is just a physical visual inspection of each component. And a lot of the information that these engineers rely on come from either the board or management. So, we're letting them know how old we think some of the components are. If they've been replaced recently, we let them know. We're also looking at the standard list and letting them know which items need to be reviewed as part, which are sort of the association's responsibility and need to be reviewed. As part of their physical analysis, the engineer will provide a description of how the assessment was conducted. They'll also provide cost estimates for each component's repair or replacement. These numbers are sort of guidelines. They're based on sort of standard pricing throughout the industry. They aren't the exact number that you are going to pay. And they'll also include the sources used to obtain those cost estimates. It is really important that if you're looking to do an upcoming project, to get proposals so you have a better idea of what the actual number will be. The reserve study is really a sort of guideline or a roadmap for what you should be doing, but it's not concrete and set in stone. You do need to get those actual numbers prior to starting projects. The next part is the financial analysis. So this is a summary of the reserve amount needed for the projects and expenses. So they will come and do an evaluation and look at all the different components, and then they will assign a replacement cost to them. And that is part of their evaluation of how much funding needs to happen on an annual basis by the association to help contribute to their replacement. They also will provide a description of the methods used to compute the funding status. Let's see here, sorry. And some of the numbers, again, in this portion are contributed by the management company or the association and board. So they will speak with us regarding how much we're contributing currently on an annual basis to your capital reserve, and also how much you have in your capital reserve account already. So they use those numbers as the basis to start the projections of the funding needed for your capital reserve. So what are some of the benefits of a reserve study? This really ties into the point that Dave made earlier. It helps the board meet their fiduciary responsibility. You need to be paying attention to how much the board is, how much the association is spending, and making sure that you're reserving properly in order to do upcoming capital replacement projects. Some of the other benefits, it's a communication tool. So it explains to owners where the funds are going, why you're putting aside this pot of money each year for capital reserve. And it also kind of helps explain why fees might be increasing. It helps people understand the planned projects that are coming up for the association. And finally, not the last benefit, but the third benefit of a reserve study that we'll touch on is it does help the association prioritize which projects they should be doing. It's not set in stone that, if your reserve study says, oh, your roof needs to be replaced in the next 5 years. Maybe your roof lasts another 5 years after that, or maybe it fails 3 years from now. It's a general guideline and tool, so it does help you, pay attention to some of those elements that might be coming up for replacement, and draws your attention to really the future capital needs of the association. So just a little bit about capital planning. I sort of touched on this in the last slide. The board and management should really work together to decipher which projects should be reviewed and in what order. This is something that we can do as part of the annual budgeting process. Besides looking at the operating side of things, there should be, a review of your capital budget and future capital expenses and projects. If you have projects coming up, you are going to want to obtain proposals that have definitive costs for said projects. In the reserve study, the engineer is including the cost of the project itself and the cost estimate for the project itself. They're not including any other fees that might go into that project. So, there might be engineering and architect fees involved if you're doing a roof replacement and you need specifications done, which is a great example of where you really should have an engineer involved. And they also make sure that there's apples to apples bidding. So it's really important to obtain proposals and understand the total cost of projects, not just the project itself. And again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, the remaining useful life that's given to you in a reserve study is an estimate. Components can last longer, or they can also fail sooner. We do see that from time to time when proper preventative maintenance isn't done. Components don't necessarily reach their useful life. So lastly, we're just going to touch on the Vanica board portal. As many of you may be aware, we do host monthly training sessions on the Vanica board portal. This is the portal that homeowners have access to, but also the board. So with associations, the homeowners have access to these top items here. And then down here, you have your board action items. So these are the items that you as board members have access to at a moment's notice. It's really, our system is meant to be transparent. You can go in and look at invoices in real time, collection statuses, ARC requests, work orders. So it's really meant to be collaborative with our boards. All of our trainings for this month of July actually have passed, but we do have one coming up on August 3rd at 6 p.m. That is our beginner training session that reviews the entire dashboard. So we go through all of the homeowner sections and the board action section. Or on August 10th at 12 p.m. in the afternoon, we have our advanced session, which just outlines this board action items, and is for those who have been in the portal, have played around in the portal, have maybe some specific questions, and that is meant to be a little more interactive. So that is it. The other thing I'd like to remind everyone of, we do have another roundtable coming up. It is on snow removal. That will be on August 9th. It's hard to believe that we have to start thinking about snow removal and budgets already, but that time of year has arrived. And so the snow removal board roundtable will be with Guy Pine of Dooley and Pine. He did a presentation last year, which was super helpful. I personally learned some new things, and it also shed some light on some of the staffing and budgetary issues that are happening within the snow removal industry as of last year. And unfortunately, I think some of it will be a repeat this year. And lastly, last month, Greg Bustamante of Bustamante Engineering did a presentation, a board roundtable presentation on reserve studies. If you would like to learn more about reserve studies than what I just briefly recapped, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat and we can send you a link to that presentation. For all the upcoming presentations, you'll receive the emails just like you did for this a few weeks prior, and then some reminders as they come up. So without further ado, I guess I will open it up to questions. I did not notice, let's see, did not notice any that came into the chat during our meeting. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, this is Ed Murphy. I have a question on the board access. Right now, I just have access to the member aspect of that. I don't have board. How do I get board access?
So your manager can assist you with that. Ed,
Okay.
which association are you a part of?
Waynesbrook.
Waynesbrook? All right. I've made a note and I will make sure to reach out and make sure you get set up with that board access.
Sounds great. Thank you.
No problem. Hi, Beth. I see your hand raised there.
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. My question is about the issue of declaration documents and assessments.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the question is, when you talk about the language of assessments in the declaration, is that, what does that cover?
Depends on when your declaration was written, but most likely it's
Oh,
gonna.
wait, just slow down a little bit. I'm hard to hear. Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
sorry. It's going to cover mainly the specifics such as your assessments are due on the 1st of each month, the date that that the assessment is due at the latest, and usually your process for if you're allowed to levy late fees or fines or so forth for those kind of assessments. Then you could break that down with resolutions, such as creating a nominal amount for the late fees. So if it's $25 or $35 after the 10th or 15th of the month, and the process of collections. That would be usually done in your regulations or your rules and regulations or your resolution.
Yeah,
Where would you find language for if you wanted to have an assessment, like if you're doing a huge project?
oh,
you're
so you mean a special assessment?
Yeah, but how do you go? Where would the language for that?
So typically the language for a special assessment is in the bylaws of the association. There may also be some language in the declaration, but those two are typically where special assessments are outlined in the process for special assessments. The other thing about it does get confusing because generally in the language, you say assessment and people think special assessment. But when we talk about assessments, for the most part, we're talking about your monthly fees. The other thing that is in your declaration, if you're a condominium, it tells you how your assessments are broken down. So how it's determined who is charged what, which is typically on the percentage of interest ownership. Or if you're a homeowners association, it lets you know that it's an equal interest and it's divided evenly among the homes.
Okay, so let me get this straight. If there was a need for a special assessment,
Mhm.
okay, the language should either be in the declaration or the bylaws, correct?
Correct.
All right,
Yes.
and since you know a lot more about this than I do, I'm a new board member. Is it usually something that the owners have to vote on, or can the board say, we need an assessment for blah, 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 because we desperately need a new XYZ?
That's a great question. Without reading your documents, I can't advise on that. It's really dependent on when your documents were written. Typically, boards are able to levy special assessments without votes, but that is not always the case. So before moving forward, you're definitely going to want to work with your manager to review the governing documents to determine the process for levying a special assessment.
Okay, and these, as I said, these documents, are they generated by management, the management company? Are they generated through the state? How are they generated?
Do you mean copies of them or how they
No,
were?
I mean the actual documents. The
Oh,
wording and
so yeah, so the actual documents should be posted to your Vanica portal.
No, that wasn't my, no, I want to know the development of the documents.
So when the developer built the community, their legal team or lawyers drafted your declaration and bylaws and submitted them to the county for records. So they were developed at the beginning of your community and signed into law, by a judge and attached to each of the deeds of the community. When that you can make changes, like we stated before, to your declaration, which would have to go through the legal process and then also be signed back into law by a judge, or not law, but signed by a judge and recorded at the courthouse as well. But they are created by usually a lawyer of the declarant at the time that the units are built.
So in other words, the current documents, all right, the declaration and all that, for I'm the tower at Oak Hill, okay, would be on the Vanica portal, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right,
If not, I'm sure that Carol can help you with them very quickly.
I'm sure. I just, as I said, this is all very, very important. I mean,
Sure.
Because, you need things to be done that are also not just how they look, but safety factors. So you want to make sure you can get the money from a variety of places. Thank you very much.
No problem, Beth.
Lauren, I have a question because I came on late. I'm sorry. I was
It's
late
okay,
getting
Lynn.
home. I was late getting home. Was this recorded? Will I be able to watch the beginning part or?
Absolutely, yes. So we did record this session. Lynn, I will put my email in the chat. If you want to just send me an email, I can send you the link, or you can also ask your manager, and they can get a copy as well. We do record all of our sessions. So if there are any historic ones that you missed that you're interested in, chances are we do have a recording of it, and CAMCO is working on developing out a YouTube page. We'll have a lot of this posted for future reference for our boards.
Hi. Could you clarify? Hi, how are you?
Good.
Hi. I wonder if you could clarify the need for a board-only email and what that is, in terms of establishing that, how you have a separate email.
Sure. So what we recommend is that you create. So some boards create one generic email for all of the board to use. But what I think we were really referring to in the presentation was that board members should create a specific email for just board business. So for example, your email might be Nancy Williams, your association name @gmail.com. And the reason why we recommend that is because it does help streamline. So you would have all of your board emails in one place. You're not sorting through, if you're like me, all of the different shopping emails and deal sites that you're getting emails from on a daily basis. And it also comes into play, which I know we don't like to talk about, but if an association, if the board or the association is ever subject to a lawsuit, your personal emails would be part of discovery. Whereas if you had a separate email just for board business, that would be the one that, would be searched for discovery purposes.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Does anyone else have a question? All right, well, thank you everyone for attending this evening. We really appreciate it.